It was supposed to be a perfect Sunday morning, a day for relaxation, family, and quiet moments in the park. The sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink, while a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Families strolled along pathways, children laughed as they played on swings, and the smell of fresh-cut grass mingled with the aroma of coffee from a nearby cafe. It was the kind of day that made you believe, just for a moment, that everything in the world was peaceful. But peace can be fragile, and sometimes the smallest misunderstanding can shatter it. In the middle of the park, sitting on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a tall oak tree, was Marcus, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his mid-30s with a warm smile and kind eyes. Next to him sat Lily, a cheerful 6-year-old girl with bright blue eyes, freckles sprinkled across her nose, and curly blonde hair that danced in the wind. She clutched a coloring book in one hand and a crayon in the other, her giggles echoing as Marcus teased her about staying inside the lines. They weren't father and daughter in the traditional sense, but their bond was undeniable. Marcus had been Lily's foster father for almost a year, and during that time, they had built a relationship filled with trust, love, and a shared sense of humor. To anyone passing by, they looked like a picture of joy, a father-daughter duo enjoying a perfect day. But not everyone saw it that way. On the other side of the park, a woman named Karen stood by the picnic tables, her sharp eyes narrowing as she noticed Marcus and Lily together. Karen was in her early 40s, dressed in designer activewear with perfectly styled hair and an expression that could curdle milk. She clutched her phone tightly, her lips pursed in disapproval as she watched the two interact. Something about the scene didn't sit right with her. Also, she convinced herself. Karen's mind raced with assumptions and judgments. Why would a black man be with a little white girl? Were they even related? Was she safe? Her thoughts spun into a frenzy, and before long she decided that it was her civic duty to intervene. She marched closer, her sneakers crunching against the gravel path. Her steps were purposeful, her gaze fixed on Marcus and Lily. From the bench, Marcus noticed her approach and offered a polite smile, but Karen didn't return it. Instead, she stopped a few feet away, crossed her arms, and cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me," she began, her tone laced with suspicion. "Is everything okay here?" Marcus's smile faltered, and he glanced at Lily, who was too engrossed in her coloring to notice the tension. "Yes, everything's fine. Can I help you with something?" Karen's eyes darted to Lily, then back to Marcus. "I just find it unusual," she said carefully, "to see a little girl with someone who doesn't look like her father." Marcus' expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "Lily's my foster daughter. We're just spending some time together." Karen's eyebrows shot up. "Foster daughter," she repeated as if the words were foreign. "Do you have any proof of that?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd dealt with judgment before, but it never got easier. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his tone calm. "I don't carry paperwork around with me, ma'am. But I assure you Lily is safe and well cared for." Karen didn't seem convinced. She took a step closer, her voice rising slightly. "I think I should call the police, just to make sure everything's legitimate here. You understand, right? It's for her safety." At that moment, Lily looked up, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she asked softly. Marcus's heart broke at the fear creeping into her voice. He reached out and gently patted her hand. "Nothing's wrong, sweetie. This lady is just concerned." But Karen was already dialing, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. As she spoke to the dispatcher, her voice carried through the park, drawing the attention of nearby families. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious situation at the park. There's a man here with a little girl, and I don't think he's her father." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, willing himself to stay composed. He knew how these situations could escalate, how quickly things could spiral out of control. He glanced around and noticed the stares, the murmurs. People were watching, but no one was stepping in. Minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the park's tranquility. Lily clung to Marcus's arm, her coloring book forgotten. He whispered reassurances to her, but inside, he felt a storm brewing. When the police arrived, Karen greeted them with a mix of relief and self-righteousness. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, gesturing toward Marcus. "I was just trying to protect the child." The officers turned to Marcus, their expressions neutral but their presence intimidating. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions," one of them said. As Marcus began to explain, Karen folded her arms, confident that she had done the right thing. But what she didn't realize was that the truth was about to unravel in a way she could never have predicted, a truth that would leave her standing in stunned silence. And as the first hints of that truth began to surface, the park grew eerily quiet, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. What would happen next would change the lives of everyone involved. The officer's gaze lingered on Marcus as he knelt beside Lily, softly reassuring her while she buried her face in his sleeve. Despite the comforting words Marcus whispered, she trembled slightly, clutching his arm tighter. He could feel her little hands gripping the fabric of his jacket, and he instinctively wrapped his arm around her, as if shielding her from the weight of the world suddenly pressing down on them both. One officer crouched down to Lily's eye level, offering her a small, warm smile. "Hey there, sweetheart. Is this your dad?" Lily peeked out from behind Marcus's shoulder, her wide blue eyes flickering between the officer and Karen, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed with an air of self-satisfaction. "Yeah," Lily answered quietly, her voice soft but firm. "He's my dad." Karen let out a faint scoff, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. The officer glanced over his shoulder toward her but didn't respond. Instead, he shifted his focus back to Marcus. "Sir, do you have any ID on you?" Marcus nodded, reaching carefully into his back pocket. He moved slowly, deliberately, aware that any sudden movement might escalate the situation. He pulled out his wallet, handing over his license and foster care ID. The second officer, standing a few feet back, took the cards and stepped aside to run them through the system. As the first officer examined the ID, Marcus could sense Karen's gaze drilling into the back of his head. She hadn't stepped away, remaining rooted in place like a self-appointed guardian of the park. Her expression was rigid, and Marcus could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, desperately trying to rationalize what she had done. Lily, now holding tightly to Marcus's hand, looked up at him, her voice a whisper. "Did I do something wrong?" Marcus felt his heart tighten. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong," he said, brushing a curl away from her forehead. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused. That's all." Karen shifted on her feet, catching part of their exchange. She let out a breath, clearly not satisfied with the officer's calm demeanor. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble," she interjected, stepping forward slightly. "But I just think it's strange. You can't be too careful these days. You hear stories all the time." Marcus resisted the urge to respond, knowing that anything he said could be twisted. Instead, he focused on Lily, squeezing her hand gently to reassure her. The second officer returned, handing Marcus IDs back. His face softened as he crouched down to Lily's level again. "Lily, can I ask you something?" he said. Lily nodded hesitantly. "What's your favorite thing to do with your dad?" A small smile crept onto her face. "We make pancakes every Sunday, but sometimes he lets me eat the whipped cream straight from the can." She giggled, momentarily forgetting the tension hanging over the park. Marcus smiled down at her, grateful for the lightness in her voice. The officer nodded, glancing toward his partner. "Sounds like fun," he said, rising to his feet. "Mr. Johnson, everything checks out. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." Marcus let out a slow breath, his muscles relaxing slightly. "I understand. Thanks for handling it calmly." But Karen wasn't finished. She took a step forward, her voice firm. "You're just going to let it go at that?" she asked, disbelief etched across her face. "I mean, you can't seriously think this isn't suspicious." The officer's expression hardened slightly, though he kept his composure. "Ma'am, Mr. Johnson is this child's legal guardian. There's no cause for concern here." Karen's mouth opened as if to argue further, but the words faltered. For a moment, she seemed caught between outrage and embarrassment, her face flushing with a hint of pink. She glanced at Lily, then Marcus, but the confidence she had displayed earlier was slowly unraveling. Still, she wasn't ready to back down completely. "I just think," she said, quieter now, "people need to be vigilant. I was only trying to help." Marcus met her eyes, his tone calm but firm. "I understand that. But sometimes, helping can do more harm than good." Karen shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. The officers offered a polite nod to Marcus and Lily before walking back toward their patrol car, leaving Karen standing alone. The hum of their radios faded into the distance as the park slowly resumed its usual rhythm. Marcus glanced around and noticed the subtle shift in the air. The families who had been watching from afar gradually turned away, returning to their picnics and conversations. A few parents offered sympathetic smiles, but no one approached. The moment had passed, but Marcus knew the weight of it would linger for a long time. As they gathered their things, Lily tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Can we still get ice cream?" Marcus laughed softly, kneeling to meet her eyes. I think that's a great idea." They walked hand in hand toward the park exit, Lily's laughter once again filling the air. Behind them, Karen remained standing beneath the oak tree, watching as they disappeared down the path. And though the incident was over, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd have to defend his right to love and protect the child at his side. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that lingered long after the officer left. The quiet of the house, which usually brought comfort after Lily had gone to bed, felt heavier tonight. He sat at the kitchen table, absently stirring his tea, staring at the reflection of the overhead light in the darkened window. His phone buzzed softly against the wooden surface. "Andre again." "Andre, if you don't answer me, I'm coming over." Marcus smirked faintly but finally typed out a reply. "Marcus, I'm fine. It's just been a long day. Don't worry." Her response came quick. "Andrea, too late. I'm already worried." He didn't answer after that. There wasn't much else to say. The day had taken something out of him, but it wasn't just frustration. It was exhaustion, the kind that settled in his bones and weighed down his steps. The next morning, Marcus dropped Lily off at school, lingering by the gate just long enough to watch her disappear inside. She always gave him one last wave before she ran to catch up with her friends. Today was no different, but Marcus noticed something he hadn't before. Karen's car sat parked just across the street. She wasn't looking his way, or at least she pretended not to. Her gaze stayed fixed on the schoolyard, lips pressed in a thin line as if waiting for something to confirm whatever she believed. Marcus clenched his jaw but kept his composure. He didn't know why she was there, but it didn't feel like coincidence. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he caught her glance shifting to his car, eyes narrowing slightly. Marcus let out a slow breath, gripping the wheel a little tighter. By the time he made it to work, his mind was still turning over possibilities. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she had a kid who attended the same school. But something about the way she lingered bothered him. That evening, as he picked Lily up, Marcus scanned the lot for Karen's car but saw no sign of her. He felt relief at first, but it was short-lived. Lily chatted happily in the back seat about her day, something about a class project and painting. But Marcus's thoughts drifted when he noticed headlights trailing his car too closely as he neared their street. He made an extra turn, one he normally wouldn't, and the headlights followed. Marcus' grip tightened around the steering wheel. He knew that car. Karen. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the car slowed briefly a few houses down before continuing down the road. Lily hopped out of the back seat, oblivious to the tension that had taken hold of Marcus. "Can we have spaghetti tonight?" she asked, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. Marcus smiled, though his mind was elsewhere. "Sure thing, kiddo." As she ran inside, Marcus lingered at the end of the driveway, eyes scanning the street. He wasn't sure if he was overreacting, but something told him this wasn't over. Later that night, as Marcus tucked Lily into bed, he kissed her forehead softly and lingered by the doorway for a moment. He didn't know why he felt so uneasy, but something about today didn't sit right. Downstairs, his phone vibrated on the counter. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Marcus hesitated before answering. "Hello." There was silence at first, then a faint sound in the background, a voice, muffled and distant, before the line clicked dead. Marcus frowned, staring at the phone for a long moment. He placed it face down on the counter and leaned against the sink, staring out the window into the dark yard. The quiet no longer felt comforting. Marcus stayed by the kitchen sink longer than he realized, the cold edge of the counter pressing into his palms as his eyes lingered on the shadows outside. The streetlights flickered faintly, casting long stretches of darkness between houses. Nothing moved out there. No cars, no late-night joggers. But Marcus still felt it. The silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that waited. He stepped away from the window, shaking his head as if to dismiss the feeling. Maybe it was just the weight of the day catching up to him. Maybe he was letting his thoughts spiral too far. He had Lily to think about. Upstairs, the faint sound of her soft snoring drifted down the hall. The noise grounded him for a moment. Marcus flipped the lock on the front door, double-checking it, then went through the same routine at the back. His phone sat on the counter where he left it, but something pulled his attention back to it. The unknown call wasn't sitting right. He pressed the screen awake, scrolling through his recent calls. There was no voicemail, nothing he could trace, but the unease still lingered. Marcus hesitated for a moment before pulling up Andrea's number. He wasn't sure why, but something told him to reach out. "Hey," Andrea answered after 2 rings, her voice groggy with sleep. "You know it's almost midnight, right?" Marcus leaned against the counter, keeping his voice low. "Yeah, I know, sorry. Have you ever had someone follow you? Like, not just in passing, but really follow you? Andrea paused, her tone sharpening. What's going on? Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, pacing the kitchen. It's probably nothing. Karen was at Lily's school today. I didn't think much of it at first, but then she followed us home. Andrea's voice dropped, serious now. What? I made an extra turn, and she stayed right behind me. Stopped down the street when I pulled in. Marcus, that's not nothing. Did you call anyone about it? Marcus sighed. What am I supposed to say? That some woman from the park can't seem to mind her own business. She didn't break any laws. Andrea was quiet for a beat. Maybe not, but it's not normal. You know that. Marcus knew she was right, but something about the situation felt impossible to explain. Karen hadn't yelled or caused a scene after the park. She hadn't even confronted him again, but her presence felt intentional. As Marcus ended the call, he noticed something odd. The faint glow of a phone screen flickered across the street, near the corner by the old mailbox. He hadn't seen anyone there when he locked the doors. Marcus moved carefully, inching toward the window without making his movements obvious. Peering through the blinds, he could barely make out the silhouette standing just far enough away to avoid suspicion. The light vanished after a few moments, leaving only the figure and the soft outline of their car parked nearby. Marcus stayed frozen in place, watching. The figure never moved closer. They just stood there. Minutes passed, and finally the car pulled away, headlights off as it rolled down the street. Marcus didn't sleep much that night. The next day felt normal enough, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching him. He dropped Lily off at school, keeping a careful lookout for Karen's car, but it was nowhere to be seen. At work, everything passed uneventfully, the usual grind of meetings and emails filling the hours. By the time he returned home with Lily, he almost convinced himself he had imagined it all, until he checked the mailbox. Tucked between the usual bills and flyers was a small, plain envelope with no return address. Marcus glanced around, but the street was empty. He opened it carefully, his pulse quickening. Inside was a single piece of paper. Keep watching. Marcus's heart pounded. He glanced at Lily, who was already skipping toward the house, unaware. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something heavier than frustration. He felt afraid. Marcus stood at the mailbox, gripping the envelope a little too tightly as he scanned the street one more time. The soft hum of distant traffic was the only sound, and the normalcy of the afternoon felt like a thin veil stretched over something much darker. He tucked the note into his pocket and walked inside, keeping his steps steady, his expression neutral. Lily didn't need to see him worried. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Marcus sat in the living room, the lights low, phone in his hand. He thought about calling Andrea, but something stopped him. He didn't want to explain this. Not yet. Part of him still felt like there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone had the wrong address, or it was a prank. But the way Karen's car had followed them, the way that figure had stood outside the night before, it wasn't adding up. Marcus flipped the envelope over in his hands again, studying every crease, but there was nothing else. No markings, no signs of who had sent it. He tossed it onto the coffee table and leaned back with a sigh. He needed to sleep. Maybe things would make more sense in the morning. But sleep didn't come easy. At some point in the middle of the night, Marcus woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. He sat up immediately, straining his ears. The steps were soft but deliberate, moving just outside the front door. Marcus's heart raced as he quietly rose to his feet, moving toward the window. Careful not to disturb the blinds too much, he peered out. At first, he didn't see anything. The porch light illuminated the front steps, but the street beyond was empty. Then he saw her. Karen. She stood at the edge of his driveway, just barely within the light's reach, looking up at the house. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. He opened the front door just enough to step out onto the porch. Karen? His voice was calm, but the tension in his chest told a different story. She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Karen spoke, her voice softer than he expected. I thought something was wrong. Marcus frowned. What are you talking about? Karen took a step closer, hesitating. I thought Lily wasn't safe. Marcus' grip tightened on the doorframe. Lily is fine. She's asleep. You have no right to be here. Karen didn't move any closer, but her eyes flickered toward the second-floor window. I saw something, she said quietly. At the park, that day. I didn't know how to explain it, but I thought I saw someone else near Lily. Someone watching her. Marcus' blood ran cold. What do you mean? Karen swallowed, looking down at her feet. It wasn't you. I thought it was. But it wasn't. Marcus' mind raced, piecing things together. The figure outside his house. The note in the mailbox. Why didn't you say anything? Marcus's voice was sharper now, but Karen didn't flinch. I thought I was overreacting, she admitted. But then I saw that car follow you home. I wasn't sure if it was connected, but I needed to make sure. Marcus stared at her, his frustration giving way to something colder. He wasn't sure if he believed her, but if there was even a chance she was right. A faint noise interrupted his thoughts. A car engine, idling a little too long down the street. Marcus turned his head just in time to see headlights flicker off as the car pulled away from the curb. Karen stepped back. That's the one, she whispered. Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him. Through the peephole, he watched as Karen lingered for a moment before walking back to her own car. She didn't leave right away. Instead, she sat there waiting. Marcus stayed by the window, watching the street long after the car disappeared. The next morning, as he walked Lily to school, Marcus couldn't help but notice Karen parked across the street again. But this time, he didn't feel the same frustration. Instead, he felt something else. He wasn't sure if Karen was watching him, or if she was watching out for something else. The walk home from school that afternoon felt longer than usual. Marcus held Lily's hand a little tighter, even though she didn't seem to notice. She chatted about her day, her small feet skipping along the sidewalk as if nothing had happened. For her, nothing had. Marcus wanted to keep it that way. Karen's car was still parked down the street, though she hadn't approached them again. Marcus could see her watching from behind the wheel, eyes following them carefully, but this time he didn't feel the usual irritation. "Daddy, can we stop at the park for a little bit?" Lily tugged at his arm, breaking his focus. Marcus glanced down at her, the easy smile on her face, almost convincing him to say yes. But the memory of the note in his mailbox and the figure standing outside their house weighed too heavily on him. He forced a smile. "Not today, baby. Maybe tomorrow." Lily pouted for a moment, but it passed quickly as they neared the house. As Marcus unlocked the door, he glanced around the street one last time. Nothing seemed out of place, but his senses stayed sharp, every small sound stretching his nerves a little thinner. The evening passed quietly. Marcus tried to relax, making dinner while Lily danced around the living room with her dolls. The house felt warmer with her laughter, but Marcus couldn't fully shake the feeling that they weren't as alone as they seemed. After Lily went to bed, Marcus sat by the window, the weight of the day pressing down harder than usual. The street outside was empty now. Karen's car was gone. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He thought about the way Karen had looked at him earlier, how sure she was that something wasn't right. He dismissed her as overbearing, maybe even intrusive, but now he wondered if she had seen something he missed. Marcus found himself reaching for his phone. He hesitated for a long moment, thumb hovering over Andrea's name before finally pressing call. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Marcus. Everything okay?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "I don't know. I think so. I wanted to check in." Andrea's tone softened. "That's not like you. What's going on?" He debated how much to say, but the words slipped out before he could stop them. "It's Karen. She's been hanging around. At first, I thought she was just being nosy, but she said something today. Something that got to me." Andrea was quiet for a moment. "What did she say?" Marcus leaned against the counter, running his hand over his face. "She thinks someone's been watching Lily. Not her, exactly, but someone else. I thought she was just making things up, but now I'm not so sure." Andrea didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice was low and serious. "Marcus, I hate to say it, but maybe she's right. I've heard stories like this before. People lurking around schools, watching kids. It's rare, but it happens." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "I can't believe I didn't notice anything." "You've been doing your best," Andrea reassured him. "It's not easy being a single parent, Marcus. You can't catch everything. But now that you know, just stay alert. If you see anything else, don't hesitate to call someone." Marcus nodded to himself. "Yeah, you're right." After the call ended, Marcus stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the darkened street outside. He told himself there was nothing more to worry about, that he was being cautious enough. But something shifted the next morning. As Marcus and Lily walked to school, a familiar car rolled past them, slowing just slightly as it neared. Marcus felt his stomach drop when he recognized it. It wasn't Karen's. It was the same dark car he had seen idling near his house at night. He watched closely, gripping Lily's hand tighter as the car turned the corner and disappeared from sight. That evening, Marcus didn't wait. He called the local police, explaining what had happened. They took down the details, though Marcus could tell the officer on the other end was trying to keep him calm. "It's probably nothing," the officer said, "but we'll send someone by to check the area tonight. Let us know if you see anything else." Marcus appreciated the gesture, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. That night, just as Marcus was locking up, a soft knock echoed from the front door. His heart jumped as he peered through the peephole, only to see Karen standing there with her arms crossed, looking uneasy. Marcus opened the door slowly. "Karen?" She shifted awkwardly. "I know it's late, but I saw that car again, parked down by the corner." Marcus stepped outside, scanning the street. Sure enough, the car was there, barely visible beneath the street lamp. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. "I think it's been following me too." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He glanced at Lily's bedroom window, watching the soft glow of her nightlight. "I'll call the police again," Marcus said firmly. Karen nodded. "Good, I just thought you should know." As Marcus dialed, the car suddenly pulled away, headlights flicking on as it disappeared into the night. The next few days passed without incident. Marcus kept a watchful eye, but the car didn't return, and Karen eventually stopped parking across the street. For the first time in weeks, things felt normal again. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the whole experience had left something behind. He didn't know who had been watching or why, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't ignore the signs again. Sometimes, even the people who seem like they're meddling might just be the ones looking out for you.